Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 61 of Nutanix Weekly. I'm your host, Andy Whiteside. I've been gone for a few weeks. I think a lot of us have, and now it's Halloween. We have a lot to cover. I guess before we jump too much into the serious stuff, which we probably need to because we've got a short amount of time today, we were just having the Halloween discussion. Well, first I was having a discussion around how the previous owner of my house used what at the time probably seemed like a great idea, and I see a ton of this in home automation with my HVAC unit for upstairs. But now it's so complicated you can't enable the latest digital transformation of home HVAC to work with it. So I've either got to start over, which I'm not going to do because it's probably $10,000, or I'm just going to live with the fact that I can't bring my house in 2023 into my Google Nest modern digital transformation from my HVAC world. Jirah, you had a phrase for that. What'd you call it?
I called it tech debt. Yeah, it's a real thing. It's a real threat.
So someone over-invested too deeply in tech. Now I can't get out of it. Is that what you're calling it?
It's past decisions made, right, that lock you in and limit your options for the future, right? So always, whenever you think about a new technology, you got to think about, but how does it interoperate? How do I evolve beyond this on the next phase?
Well, I think that's going to be really closely tied into what we're going to talk about here in a minute. How about that? Ben Rogers is with Jirah Cox. That was the voice of Jirah Cox, which hopefully you know by now. And Ben Rogers, those are our two Nutanix gurus on the call. Ben, how's it going?
Good, man. Doing well, Andy. Now, a question I would have for you is how long are you going to have to wait till you get to change that AC unit to technology that will work with your Google Nest? Have you figured out that piece of it?
Well, I don't plan to live here. It's my big house for when I have 4 kids, and it's the right thing for what I needed 2 years ago. I don't plan to be here in 1 to 3 years, so I'm going to let the next guy deal with that.
I hear you.
I think there's some examples there in our real world.
I was going to say, you're just beefing up your segue more and more. Like your mobility affects the choices you make. That's amazing, yeah. Andy.
And if I had some form of a ubiquitous hypervisor I could put in various data centers, I could have gone that I wouldn't be locked into the other guy's decision. I could come halfway back, couldn't I?
Oh man, if I could virtualize my house, I'd have so much more stuff done.
Well, I think the Facebook guys are actually working on that.
Right, roll your house back to a snapshot from before you put your foot to the ceiling.
I use this one all the time too. I travel a lot, and I go now. Finally, in the last couple of years, there's a USB plug, a USB 1.0 or whatever, 2.0, I think, whatever it is, plug I could use to charge my paraphernalia at night, maybe multiple. Of course, now everything I have is USB-C. So, hey, it finally caught up, but it's already behind.
Yeah.
The blessing and curse of a standard. Yeah, it's tough to change that standard.
Jirah, what you just said about virtualizing your house, I'm sure my wife would love that with me. I just built a bunk bed for my son, and it's about 2 times the size of what she wanted. And when she walks in the room, I can see the look on her face where she goes, I just wish it was like it was before we started.
There you go, man.
Well, I think you guys are on the right path with that virtual. Physical is hard when you make decisions around physical things, but when you can make decisions around software, aka virtual, all of a sudden, bad decisions can be fixed more easily.
Well, I did make one mistake. I had the design in my head, and I just described it to her in little bits and pieces. I should have done some kind of simple CAD drawing that let her envision what 7 feet, 6 inches was going to look like. And I gave her like a design, but I don't think she had the concept of the size. And then when it started, I built it downstairs and then brought it upstairs. And when it started coming together, she was like, oh, Lord. Of course, my son's digging and he's like, oh, yeah, massive play set, blah, blah, blah. And she's just like, you've taken up 3/4 of the room with the bunk bed.
I'm envisioning like a college loft or something.
Oh, yeah, it is.
Yeah,
it's awesome.
To just beat our analogy just all the way to death, like the client approved the high-level logical design, but the physical design did not pass muster.
Well, here's another one too. Ben, was she around when you were putting parts of it together, or did she go somewhere?
Yeah, but I mean, my wife's a good designer, and I don't not a knock on her, but she just couldn't envision how this thing would fit in the room. And myself, I had done the measurements, but it's another thing when you start to put it together. Now, the saving grace is it is a loft bed, so I'm looking at her like, he's really gained the whole room because now the bed's up. But it is an ominous sight in the room, man. I mean, it's big.
Now I'm going to keep going with this. Ben, was this totally your design, or did you take a design from somewhere else where she could have gotten the best of breed out of somebody else's mind first?
So what I did was, because my wife is so picky about design and colors, is I got an example of what it would look like from a color perspective. Here's what the posts are going to look like. Here's what the rails are going to look like. And she loved that. We didn't really have the conversation about the size, and I had to make it bigger than normal because I'm doing it with a queen size bed. So I built a loft for a queen size bed. And so,
Wow.
It's massive, man. I'll take a picture and send it to y'all when we're done with the podcast.
So as I'm thinking through this, I'm thinking great big Oracle database that needs to go on premises, in private cloud, in public cloud, all at the same time. And if you're not careful, you can get it woefully wrong.
Oh yeah. Well, you're diving into where we're going into. What's interesting is this is a hot topic for us to talk to customers about right now, because this does open up some doors that, a lot of customers think about cloud, and what they immediately come to is, I got to refactor my application. And what we're able to offer with this NC2 offering is, you don't have to refactor the application to take advantage of cloud. And where Azure becomes really a good part for us is, a lot of people have Azure Spend as part of their EL licensing or ELA licensing. I'm not up to Microsoft's licensing anymore, but they roll some of this cost in there, and companies are looking at ways to try to take advantage of that without refactoring their applications.
And Ben, you got down to the money conversation, right? So you called it spend, I call it commitment. And depending on which side of the equation you're on, commitment's either really good or really bad, or depends on what moment of the commitment you're in. And so we'll talk through that more. Harvey Green is, I really referred to him as a solutions architect at XenTegra, but now he's actually running XenTegra Gov, but he's going to stay part of this podcast and other podcasts because he's a great technical mind when it comes to Nutanix. Harvey, how's it going?
Pretty good. It's a good thing I was already planning on doing that, because otherwise you would have committed me on air.
Yeah. Well, there's a couple things you got to keep doing in our world because it's good. It's the overall system. And it helps. I love doing this because we're tying technologies down to business outcomes, which is part of my world and your world, no matter what your title says.
Absolutely.
We also have a guy named Philip Sellers on. Today is day one for Philip, and Philip is kind of shadowing. He's going to be picking up some of Harvey's responsibilities when it comes to being infrastructure subject matter expert, specifically in this case, all things Nutanix. So Philip will be playing a larger role. I think he's still in mobile world trying to get from the office back to his home. So welcome, Philip, and we'll look forward to you being part of this conversation going forward. All right. Well, probably may or may not have picked up. Our topic today is in the announcement around NC2, which is Nutanix clusters on Azure. And let's jump into the blog. The blog title is from October 12th of this month, this year. Nutanix accelerates hybrid cloud with Microsoft Azure. Jirah, why do this? Why does this matter?
I was thinking as you were talking about it. Well, and as a sidebar for our listeners, I don't know what timestamp we're at in this episode, but if you'd bet me $1 about would Andy tolerate as much preamble as we had there for the podcast that you might be most excited about, right? This goes back to the history of this podcast. You were like, "Hey, Jirah, let's do a podcast." Also, by the way, when NC2 on Azure, right? And then it was almost like a punchline. At the ending of the first 5 episodes was all like, "Oh, by the way, also Jirah, when NC2 on Azure."
When did we do NC2 on AWS?
I'm going to say in the past.
Well, but it had to be podcast number 20 or something. We've been waiting a while. It's about
way
time.
back there. Yeah,
we've been waiting a while.
Right. It wasn't on my bingo card with this much pent up demand among the hosts of this podcast for us to ramble that long at the beginning. So good self-control.
You really did a good job setting it up, because a lot of those things are going to tie into what we talked about here. And it was as much Harvey beating you up as it was me, right?
So the why, I kind of formed a thought while y'all were talking about Ben mentioned refactoring, right, and moving to the cloud. And the thing I see among a bunch of my customers is those can be different timelines, and treating them like one timeline can be problematic, right? So of course we want to refactor our apps. Do we have full power to do that? Not always. I know a lot of customers that are 90%, COT software, right? Purchase software that they deploy and run. Maybe the business units dictate what the line of business software will be. IT has to run them, but there's not a lot of empowerment to actually do that refactoring yourself, right? You're waiting on the vendor to do that. But whether we have that power to refactor or not, there's a lot of mandates or benefits or use cases for getting to public cloud. I want to get out of my data center. I want to stop spending money on a DR site. I want to get more mobility or get more availability than I have in my local data center. I want to move to cloud because I've got business alignment, right, with Microsoft funding or other strategic partnerships that just don't give a hoot whether you can or can not refactor your apps or what timeline that might be. So the use case of get to cloud sooner with the apps that we have today, but prepare for the apps that we want to run tomorrow really does resonate pretty quickly.
So I'll do a normal Andyism, which is beat up on the idea that it's not cloud, it's clouds. And Jirah, when you say get to the appropriate cloud, you really mean the appropriate cloud of the cloud options as soon as you can, because time is money, efficiencies is time and money. It makes sense to get, if you're going there, damn it, get there.
Totally. The matching Jirah-ism is it is one cloud, but it's your cloud, right? It's like the Acme cloud or whatever company you work for that you need to find a way to have presence in one or more locations, right? Which can be public clouds, can be data centers, can be your on-prem, but you need to empower the business that this is the Acme cloud, right? And it has legs in all these various different availability zones. So we're saying the same thing. I agree with you.
I like that, because now you're saying the cloud. Don't think of that as from all the options. Think about the clouds or the overcast or whatever, however you want to say it. First of all, for our listeners, if you don't know where cloud comes from, it's the idea there's services that come from somewhere you don't really know what it is specifically. Therefore, IT guys drew it up on the whiteboard as a cumulus cloud quite often and said the stuff comes from there. You don't really know what it is exactly, but it comes from there. But I do like your comment that for the consumer of it, it kind of needs to look like a cloud, even though it's made up of clouds. And at the end of the day, it's their cloud story.
Right. Like as an IT leader, like you're empowering your business, right? Your counterparts in business units to solve problems with cloudy outcomes, which can be on-prem, could be fully public cloud, could be cloud native, could be NC2, can be, other SaaS services like from data center hosting and so forth. But at the end of the day, that all empowers your one company's cloud.
So I'm looking at this. I'm pretty sure this is going to be a two-part episode. Ben, I want you to talk about the number one thing, the application move, but tell me you had a comment?
Well, yeah, one of the things you said that I think is poignant to this whole conversation that gets lost in the muck sometimes with IT is about service delivery. So when you talk about, where the service is coming from, the end users don't care about that. And most C-levels at times don't care about that. They want IT to be able to deliver the services and deliver the services on demand at the SLA of the companies. That's where this multi-cloud, hybrid cloud, what I call our Nutanix foundation, that's where really this comes into play. And where some of this also comes into play is where NC2 really hits a home for some businesses is that they don't have to retrain their employees. If they know Prism and they know Nutanix, this is just another leaf off of their infrastructure, their foundation. And so that's kind of how I try to paint it to customers is that if you consume our products and consume our portfolio, whether on-prem or in cloud, you then can get to a service delivery model where it's your infrastructure behind the services that are being delivered to the company.
Right. Yeah, I guess because if you stop and think about it, you're trying to get people out of the on-premises data center, which makes a ton of sense when you look at a lot of different pieces of it. But you, the customer, you don't want to just get stuck somewhere else. So if you can come up with a way that allows you to take advantage of the best of breed, maybe at the moment, at any point in time, then you're actually winning. If you're just moving it from one place to another and you got a new type of getting stuck in the mud, then you really won.
Like I've seen some customers that take their like I come from healthcare, so the EMR, they might have technical reasons why they need to leave that EMR on-prem or close to a data center. inside of the company's network. But they might have remote sites that they could move those services off the cloud, so that the cloud component is now their edge service that's now collapsing back to an on-prem data center for whatever their crown jewel application is. So we see some companies talking to us in that regard, where they go, I've got all these sites across the world. I'd rather collapse these sites to an edge service that runs in Azure, AWS, wherever the closest presence is. But I need to safeguard my application and my databases on-prem for performance, compliance, whatever the reason would be. That's where these models really fit in really well. And again, you don't have to retrain your staff, man. If they know the Prism Pro, all of those elements of our portfolio, they can extend this out to AWS, Azure, and it's the same environment.
So I want to go into this the survey that was done by these 1,700 IT decision makers and these the 3 points they pull out. But I don't know if this is in the blog or not. Harvey, what technically is NC2 on Azure?
Well, I will give you the Harvey definition here. It is all of the wonderful, great things about Nutanix that you've been experiencing on-prem, and the ability to have that for this use case in Azure. Bare metal blades in Azure that they're providing, they're servicing, they're hosting, that don't live in your data center. So you no longer are worried about that hardware, but you still have all of the wonderful, nice things and wonderful management of Nutanix that you are now using on hardware that is not hosted by you or covered by you, that you have no responsibility over. But you still have the ability to manage it as you have been managing your on-prem stuff.
So Harvey, how is this any different than XenTegra for the past year and a half, hosting native Nutanix on our hardware in our data center? Let me say our 2 data centers, because that 2 is going to be the key.
So it's not different, because again, that is a way that the customer isn't providing the support and the touch and the feel of all of that hardware. We're providing it for them. It is just another place that you can do it.
Well, I set you up a little bit. I was highlighting the number 2. We actually have 3 if you take the fact that we have a customer where we've rolled it out within the same colo as theirs. But that's 3. What you get out of doing this within AWS or Azure is the public cloud scale of hardware. Right. And then the smartness of the Nutanix software to make it work here, there, and everywhere as needed without being unique and different.
Yeah, I mean, it's more choice. Again, just more choice as a customer as to where you want to put your data, where you want your data to live, and who you want to take care of that hardware.
So let me go back to Ben for number 1 here, the first graph that's there, and then Jirah for the next 2. And I go back to Ben because he's been talking about application refactoring and getting stuff in the cloud without having to totally rewrite it for at least 6, if not 12 months with me. Ben, number 1, it says 91% of the people surveyed moved 1 or more applications to a new IT environment over the past 12 months. What does that mean for us?
Well, I would question whether that's refactoring or whether they moved off to a SaaS-based application, so that their application get refactored from traditional on-prem to now where that company is offering SaaS-based. I see a lot of companies trying to get to a refactoring mode, but really what I see is the limitation is talent. And you and I have discussed this privately, man. There's not a lot of consulting firms that are out there that are looking at this and helping customers refactor their application. And so companies are having to look at doing it internally. And man, talent is at a premium right now.
And it's expensive. Talent, that's big part of the expense, but the time and expense associated with that to truly move it to like a SaaS app running on Kubernetes on the back end, man,
well, and let's just also you're doing this while you're also keeping the bus running. So some companies are looking, I'm going to have to pull a set of people out of the daily operation and put them on this refactoring thing. And then this, all the Jirah, I think, said it best, man. The time it takes to refactor and the time that it could take to get out to a cloud service like NC2 is two totally different time factors. The other thing we do see with this service is that some companies go, we want to refactor, but we need to have some kind of cloud presence so we're not constantly having to go back on-prem to get the pieces that we need. And so they'll stand up these clusters and then they'll, re-architect or, basically reanalyze and reformat how they're doing things once they get the NC2 clusters up.
Yeah. I mean, think about a world where they build that three-legged bar stool, but one leg's a little shorter or longer latency than the other. And you might as, how valuable is that really? It depends on how much you're willing to deal with the shortcoming. Hey, Jirah, this says 64% of the people surveyed expect to be operating in a multi-cloud environment within 1 to 3 years. Help us understand what that means. And do you think that means also their private or semi-private co-load data center as one of those multi-options?
I think to the last part, I think it's extremely likely, very much so. The multi-cloud operating environment, right, within 1 to 3 years, I agree with this strongly, right? I coach my customers. It really is an eventuality, right? As much as you can try to be deterministic and set expectations on the front end of like, we're going to tightly align to cloud A or cloud B or cloud C, and that's our strategy. Man, curveballs just happen in this world, right? And the amount of things like healthy companies grow by acquisition, right? For a large part, acquisitions get messy real fast, right? Like we don't have to think very long about our customer lists to think of customers that still have stuff that's on platform X and Y and Z that someone had great intentions to move one day, but it just hasn't happened yet. So at the very least, acquisitions, D&I, M&A activity are going to throw you some curveballs, right? So how do we help simplify multi-cloud? Because it's probably going to happen to you sooner or later. To say these workloads, they're coming to us from Azure, these are coming to us from AWS, these are coming from an on-prem environment. Help make this part of our one unified cloud that runs the business experience. Because to Ben's point, like talent is such a constraint, right? Like, are you really going to be able to double or triple your skill sets on your team to avoid what's the alternative, right? If you don't double or triple skill sets for everyone, now you're back to having silos and specialists, and now I've slowed down velocity of change that I can manage in the organization.
How often are you guys, because I know you're meeting with a lot of people, how often do you see customers that have multi-public cloud initiatives, either intentionally or unintentionally?
Both, right? I mean, for some people, it just happens, right? Some business unit goes off and tries something and it kind of sticks. The big umbrella for all this is data has gravity, right? Moving stuff around, it does happen a lot. Back to the first point, 91% of people have moved an application between environments in the last 12 months. So that ability to say, I want this app to move from X to Y, from location A to location B, people feel more empowered to mandate that more and more. But data has gravity, data has connectivity, right? Latency is a thing in the real world. And so maybe let's say worst case scenario, maybe it's a shadow IT thing. We found these VMs in this environment. Now they're under our governance, but they're in this location. Maybe best case scenario could be a more strategic, like we want to use a best of breed service. This cloud's great at AI ML, therefore go put this workload over there. But still, I have to federate it, right? It's going to be one part of my one Acme cloud.
Right. Hey, Jirah, I'm going to stay with you because I know you talked to a lot of enterprise customers. That last one, 83% agree that a hybrid multi-cloud is ideal. I want to ask that question as it relates to a public cloud plus their semi-private or private cloud first, whether you believe that number is accurate, and then we'll expand that in a minute.
I would agree, right, that 100% that the stat around agreeing that hybrid multi-cloud is ideal is accurate, and I think that's even going to grow, right? Because that's kind of the message is that is keeping your options open, right? We've done it since the history of Nutanix of supporting customer choice of like, where do you want to run these workloads, and how do you plan to move them when you need to, right? What kind of choices can you make today that don't lock out choices tomorrow, like buying the wrong HVAC units that now I can't use my fancy thermostats, right? Like put these VMs in a certain cloud today, but when call it any circumstance changes, right? Whether it's economic, financial, strategic alliances, even like bordering on like political or PR reasons, right? Like we don't want to use this cloud anymore for perception X, right? I was with a buddy a couple weeks ago who supports our Fed customers, right? And he mentioned about a certain cloud that like didn't support warfighters, right? It was like their stance of like, we don't want to do that anymore. So if you were in that industry and using that cloud, you'd want to move your workloads. Well, how would you move a cloud native VM workload if you had gone all in? Yeah. And NC2 has the answer for that, is to say NC2 is the same Nutanix that you run on-prem or in any cloud that we support today. And of course, this podcast is happy to say that that includes Azure today. Workload mobility, when there's a need for it, is invaluable.
Yeah, I mean, to the point of some type of even live migration without downtime at all would be a future state potentially.
Potentially, yeah. I mean, latency is still a thing. Laws of physics still apply. And depending on your source and target, of course, I'm going to go to the engineering, it depends answer. If you're ever crossing hypervisors, right, changing from hypervisor, like going from vSphere to AHV, that's not a no downtime approach, right? You can't change hypervisors with a no downtime live migration.
So I think you were touching on this, but let me change the statement / question. So 1,700 IT decision makers agree that public cloud, multi-cloud. Public cloud, a multi-cloud is ideal. For example, you've got GCP and Azure. You've got Azure and AWS. You've got GCP, Azure, and AWS, and you're commingling workloads throughout those three. Do you think that number's that high?
I have very few customers that are in all three major public clouds. Usually it's on-prem in one cloud or on-prem with at most kind of two clouds looking for integration.
I bring that up because I've kind of, from guys that doesn't have to implement this stuff every day or maintain it or maintain relationships with two public cloud vendors at the same time. The idea that you could put some workloads in one and some in the other, and if somebody starts to treat you badly or change their political views or raise the rates, you can just start ramping up the other one, and it's all because you decided, not necessarily that you were in different resource zones within one public cloud. You were literally in two public clouds. And one going down didn't kill you, and one changing their political mindset didn't impact you either. You were ready to turn it up on the other side.
100%. I mean, think about how many customers we have today that we all call on that talk about implementing a multi-vendor strategy for the purposes of keeping everybody honest, keeping pricing healthy, keeping the sword sharp from a talent and staffing perspective, right? Keeping their options open. NC2 brings that ability to implement a multi-vendor strategy with simplicity, right, with sanity to the whole process, to public clouds, right? There's no native Azure way to deploy like an AWS VM or an AWS way to deploy an Azure VM. That there's a pretty big moat there, right? But that overall federating there we go layer is what brings that sanity.
And I want to move away from this, but I just can't help but keep asking the questions. Do you think it's 83%? Think a multi-public cloud is the way they're going to go and be able to handle those scenarios and more?
I mean, we all work for a company here. Do any of us host email in any cloud other than Azure?
Well, we just did a joint venture with a company that does Zimbra, so but no, I mean, email is that one thing. It's going to be in Azure, period.
Right. We all use Salesforce.
So I guess what you're saying, if you choose to do AWS for one application and you've got your email in Azure because it's a SaaS-based solution, not an IaaS solution, you're technically multi-cloud.
Well, my second question is, we all use Salesforce on this call. That doesn't run in Azure.
Yeah. So what you're saying, you won't have a choice. It's going to happen, and it's going to be application-driven in many cases. I guess I'm really focusing on
it's not your fault, but it is your problem for a lot of decision makers.
Yeah, I'm just looking at it from an IaaS perspective. Do you think, like, if we ask that question differently, do you think from an IaaS perspective, your average or 83% of people surveyed would say, yeah, we're going to have two public clouds? Or are they really saying, I'm going to have my data center or my partner data center, and I'm going to have a public cloud, and that's hybrid? Well,
so remember, that is the definition, right, that applies here, right? Like on-prem plus public cloud that operates as one seamless customer cloud equals hybrid multi-cloud, right? So I think that's partly one boat anchor. if that's the right analogy, right? Is like you've got huge data on-prem probably that might not be a good citizen for a cloud migration, right? If you have the,
Right.
this talks to the mainframe lives on-prem or lives on a colo, but next-gen stuff wants to run in public cloud, make this all fit and make it my cloud. Well, that's your hybrid multi-cloud.
Yeah. And the whole point in this offering from Nutanix around NC2 on Azure and AWS pre-release, also as well as my data center, their data center, means that it's all doable when the time comes because it's software driven, not locked into physical hardware forever. Ben did bring up that commitment thing, and I don't know if we'll get back to that at some point in this, but the commitment is might as well be locked into the hardware if you've made that commitment. You probably won't do it again, I don't think, but that's how the public cloud guys are trying to drive your decisions around the almighty dollar.
I mean, it depends. I mean, everybody on the call has a mortgage. Everybody here has also used an Airbnb, right? Length of stay affects the choices you make.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've got the house I'm in now, 5 years? I've had 3 mortgages. Somebody makes it attractive enough, I'll talk to them about it.
So yeah, right. When the right person knocks and offers the right number, right? Keeping your options open and having that agility, that mobility is, useful.
Yeah.
Man,
I guess you're saying from a Nutanix perspective, I just should never unpack. I should leave it in those virtual containers and then be ready to go.
How about it's more like we can do the move for you,
Yeah.
right? You can unpack, right? But that doesn't make it harder to move.
Well,
Right.
okay, so I got the new slogan for Nutanix. We'll move your shit.
Yeah, there you go. I'll call marketing now.
We'll move your shit when ready. Go ahead, Ben. Go ahead.
I hate to bring dollars and cents into this, but sometimes it's a matter like we're talking to a company right now that they don't want to do the capital expenditure to have any more on-prem equipment. They want to move this to an OpEx model and spread the cost out over time and not have to come out with the capital. They also want to get better density. So, some of our customers, Jirah, I'm almost positive you heard this, is why would I want to use Nutanix in Azure? Why wouldn't I just go natively in Azure? And one of the things that we can do is we can get more density on our hardware because we're controlling that hardware. In a native Azure environment, you might be a tenant on a host that other tenants are running on. In our NC2 clusters, man, that hardware is dedicated to your function, and we can also get better density on our hardware because of our software-driven platform. So a lot of times it might come to, I've got to fork out a bunch of cash, or I can go to an OpEx model and still control my destiny and get the density I need out of the hardware in a public cloud environment. And so we see a lot of customers that are starting to look at those possibilities of, I have the hardware, I control the environment. It's in an as-I environment in cloud, but I still retain some of the ownership of that infrastructure.
I mean, I was on a call before this one with a teammate who was showing me some financial models he'd worked up for his customer with only 300 VMs. So not a ginormous environment, right? On the large side, but not. We've all seen bigger, we've all seen smaller, but pretty average. With only 300 VMs, an NC2 proposal was saving them 50% per year, every single year, right? Like you could pay double and have native VMs, or you could pay half as much and run those VMs on Nutanix on bare metal in public cloud. So to your point, Ben, spot on. Like there's that break-even point that you hit because, of course, that's the name of the game, right? When you're a cloud provider, you're charging for every VM from VM1 to VM 1001. There's no freebies, right? Whereas you pay for the nodes, you control your density. And by the way, you get more performance anyway, right? Because cloud is pay for provisioning, pay again for performance, right? Oh, you want that storage tier? Oh, you want what generation of Intel host to run that VM, right? Swipe your card again. Whereas natively here, right, no one's questioning the performance of Nutanix, right? We all have customers that have blindingly fast clusters that run their workloads. That same tech comes to bare metal nodes in public cloud, and now it runs your cloud VMs as well.
Yeah, I think that hits on another important point too. That's another big advantage is when you're in public cloud, just using virtual machine instances there, you use the sizes that they've already picked and prescribed for you. And if you decide you want to go up to something different, then to Jirah's point, swipe your credit card again, and you can do that. That's great. But with NC2, you're able to just resize your VM the same as you would on-prem, and then continue moving on and not end up paying more to do that or be stuck doing it with pre-planned or pre-prescribed virtual machine instance sizes.
Yeah, I mean, we can all think of customers, right, that we've advised in the past. Hey, this VM's over provisioned, right? Doesn't need this much memory, this much CPU. You could shrink that down, and they kind of look at you and go, "Yeah, I know that, but if I try to make that smaller, someone else yells at me." Right? Like that's a political decision, not a technical decision.
Right.
Well, now imagine you're paying per gig, paying per vCPU every month. When does that get fun, right?
Yeah.
So it makes sense to optimize for, well, like I want to run these VMs. If I can't really shrink them down, right? Whether it's political or the vendor dictates the VM has to be this size, efficiency matters, right? You get way more efficiency being in control of those VMs like you are now, but on a platform of your choice, like bare metal in a public cloud provider.
Absolutely.
So guys, this is going to be 2 or 3 parts to cover this whole, because we're going to have so many of these types of conversations. We have so Philip's on with us. Philip Sellers, again, first day at XenTegra, but I want to bring him into the conversation because a week ago, last Friday, maybe he might have left sooner than that, but basically a week ago, he ran an infrastructure team for a customer here in the Charlotte area. Philip, this conversation we've been having, does it, as a customer, which you were, 3 days ago, does this make sense? Does this logic real, or is this made up numbers?
I don't know about these particular numbers, but I will say the logic's sound. One of the things that I haven't heard kind of discussed so far is best in breed services. Each one of these cloud providers is also doing their own research into things like ML and AI and other differentiated services. So not all clouds are created equal. You're going to find some services you may want to consume out of one and a competing service out of another. Well, and then you need your data next to it to make that useful. So how do you get your data there? Well, NC2 gives you a really viable way of either replicating your data into that cloud of your choice to consume it with the service of your choice. It kind of goes back to what Jirah's saying. I mean, you have unlocked, a multitude of choices here for your business to choose whatever they need to get the job done. And so I think that's the value that it ultimately brings to the table. We were a merger and acquisition heavy company, so we had a little bit of this, a little bit of that. So I will second that comment that was made earlier. That certainly grows your multi-cloud footprint. Certainly had a lot of different SaaS platforms. And at the end of the day, as a customer, I don't care, who's on the back end for Salesforce, unless there's a global, outage affecting Salesforce and it's down for me. And then, I may actually care who their service provider was, but it's about the outcomes at the end of the day. We want an email provider because none of us really want to run email. We want, whatever service or software is being provisioned for us, and we just want it available at the end of the day. When it comes to SaaS, infrastructure certainly changes that conversation, I think, to a greater degree. But I love that Jirah called out the whole COTS software, because so much of the world is still on traditional client server software, and they don't have a choice. And their vendors aren't rushing out to create a SaaS platform to switch them to. And that's still, I think, I would love to see that metric. I'd love to know how many customers' software portfolio is, what percentage of COT software. I think that has a lot to do with this sort of solution and why it's more viable for customers.
Yeah, it's one of my leading questions usually for meeting a new customer is like asking that percentage, because it helps contextualize so what kind of autonomy do you really have? What options are really open to you? Only correction, Phil, welcome to the show, is Andy's interested in running email servers, right? He said Zimbra. He's waving that flag.
So I got a guy.
Yeah, I think we all got a guy. That makes perfect sense.
I've been that guy. I like doing this more.
Yeah, me too. But I got a guy. I got a guy with a team of guys that actually like doing that stuff. So it brings into our options. Hey guys, we're out of time. It's Halloween. Ben's got a bunch of little kids. He's got to go decorate.
Wait, what?
No, I was gonna say, Andy,
I like
congrats
the
on the
way that
Halloween
one
mask.
sounded. These are my grandkids and my kids. Man. So we're gonna be face painting.
I mean,
I do-
Andy, congrats on the
do-
Halloween mask. That is really scary. Good choice.
Nice.
I do want to step on something that Phil said though, that one of the things when you talk about being able to interact with native cloud services, we do have some customers that would like to end up in like a containerization environment. That again, they move this stuff into NC2 and then they start to refactor it for whether that be now. We would love for them to go on our containerization technology and keep it all within our clusters. But we do have some customers that are looking at us going, once I get out to these clouds, how can I interact with the native services? And that is one part of this service that I assume we'll discuss in our next meeting, guys.
I was going to say, you might have to make a bookmark of that. And then when we start the next one, I'm going to ask you for that bookmark because I'm not going to remember. I might just remember to ask you about a bookmark. Let's see what happens.
Same bat time, same bat channel.
That's right. All right. Thanks,
Okay,
guys,
guys,
for jumping on with us. And we will see you. Oh, my gosh. I tell you.
Oh.
Sorry guys, I just couldn't help but do it. This has been my Halloween costume for the last 2 weekends. I've been Kermit the Frog. My wife has been Piggy. We had to go with something we could go as together. I could actually wear this tonight and probably scare the heck out of a lot of little kids that apparently Kermit the Frog has turned into kind of an intimidating figure.
If you're one of our beloved audio only listeners, pull over safely and check out the video recording of this one.
We have a 6-foot Kermit the Frog.
Oh, that's classic, man.
Love
We
it.
should have done that. We should have dressed up. Oh, I'm just not that creative. Next year, we're going to dress up.
All right.
Sure.
All right, guys. Well, thank you.
Next year's not on Halloween.
Oh, we can move it. We can move it. Somebody remind me I said this. All right, guys. Well, thank you. And we'll do it again. I assume it's going to be 2 or 3 of these episodes to get through this topic. It's a big topic. And Jirah finally got it done. He's up at night writing the code.
Took you long enough.
I'm not going to apologize. You're welcome.
All right, guys. We'll see you next week.
See ya.
Oh, that was classic.